and a warm welcome to this broadcast here on ETV Bharat. I'm Smita Sharma. It's only a few weeks now to go for Americans to go to vote. And this is one election that's been considered crucial and historic in many ways, because many would say that this is not just about the race for White House, this is perhaps a race for America's soul. So, we are going to kick off a series of conversations with strategic analysts, experts, journalists, to try and understand all the different aspects of what is at stake really in these elections for India, for the world, and for Americans themselves. In this conversation today, I'm joined here by two special guests. Ambassador Meera Shankar, she's a retired diplomat who has also served as India's envoy in the United States. And also Sriram Lakshman, who is the US correspondent for The Hindu. Appreciate both of you finding time for joining us here on ETV Bharat.
Thanks.
And, today we are going to focus on the one nomination that's really sort of made it the big headlines. Of course, American elections by themselves are big headlines. But in India, there has been a lot of chatter, a lot of focus about Kamala Harris. She is the vice presidential nominee, the first time that an Indian American, a South Asian American, as you may say, or a black woman, in fact, has been actually nominated for the vice presidential ticket from a major party. So she has teamed up with Joe Biden. If I may start with you, Sriram, in fact, because since you have been now following up the conversations in US, and I know there was a lot of excitement around the word chitti, or the younger sister, the aunt. In fact, many North Indians perhaps thought of it to be a chitti or a letter. But really, what do you think clicked for Kamala Harris to be able to secure this nomination?
Well, I think in terms of what clicked is she has a very strong public service background. She's had decades of work in public service in California as a prosecutor. Two, she was herself a presidential candidate, and she's also got this multicultural background. She appeals to black voters. She appeals to South Asian voters. She's a woman. I'm not necessarily suggesting that for that reason that these demographics will necessarily vote for her, but she is a very good pick for Biden to really widen his reach in that sense. And she's also a couple of decades younger than Joe Biden. And, the pair of them together represent I think the future for the next at least 4 or 8 years or and beyond. So I think she's a very good pick in that sense.
Right. Ambassador Meera Shankar, you think Kamala Harris is coming on? Of course, we heard her speak at the Democratic convention, but is it going to be about the racial identity, or is it going to be about the policies at stake for Americans here in these elections?
I think both. I think both she and candidate Joe Biden stress that America is at an inflection point, right, and that this election is going to be perhaps the most significant election in recent times, because at stake is whether America will survive as they know it with the values that it stands for. This is the message that both gave. So I think race is one factor because of the Black Lives Matter movement, the fact that America is embroiled in racial turmoil at the moment. So it's a very topical issue. But going beyond that, I think it's also a question of values, and it's a question of policies. I think all stressed that perhaps President Trump has not grown into his role, and that he's either incapable or unwilling, right, to put in the time and effort involved in the responsibility of being president.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, you wanted to complete something.
So I would say that it's something broader than just race.
Right. Yeah, it's broader than race, and there are a whole lot of issues about the American identity itself on the world stage that's at stake. But Sriram, what is the initial reaction like to this nomination? I mean, you have a Donald Trump and a Mike Pence combination, which is now going up against a Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And we hear of these Gallup polls coming in every week. Has Kamala Harris' candidacy, in fact, in a way, been a shot in the arm, added to the poll numbers for Joe Biden?
So it's usually, so there's something called the convention bump. Usually after a convention, you see a bump in the poll numbers of the candidate who had that convention. Now, right now, there's one poll that's come out after the Democratic convention, and it doesn't show a huge increase for the Biden-Harris ticket since before the convention. And over the course of this next week, we're going to see the Republican convention. We'll have to wait to see some other polls to look at the average bump. But here's, before 2004, the average bump after a convention was about 6 percentage points. And since 2004, it's been only about 2 percentage points. And what does that tell us? That tells us that people who are already committed to a certain ticket stay committed to it. The conventions are not going to have such a huge difference. Of course, we'll have to wait for the next couple of weeks to see all the results coming in. But right now, the convention bump has more or less not been significant.
But would you say, Sriram, going by the focus during the convention and the highlights of the speech for Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, that the focus seems to be really about trying to woo the ideological moderates at this point and people who are skeptics of Trump?
Absolutely. You saw a number of Republican lawmakers, a number of small business owners, people who have been impacted by both the pandemic policy and the response from the Trump administration, as well. I think there was a farmer as well who was talking about the trade wars with China and how it had affected his farm. And I believe that Joe Biden even very explicitly said that he's very proudly going to carry the Democratic banner to the White House, but he wants to be a president for everybody, including conservatives, moderates, as well as progressives. You saw Elizabeth Warren and you saw Bernie Sanders, who is the de facto leader of the progressive movement, speak for Mr. Biden's behalf. So it's a very inclusive, including, and this goes back to an earlier point, including with the Kamala Harris pick. It's a very inclusive message that the Democrats are trying to push out. I think that we'll see what the messaging is. There's already a sense of it over the next week with the Republican convention, but it'll be interesting to compare the two messages at the end of next week.
Right, and Donald Trump still sticking, in fact, with a physical convention, though with far lesser number of delegates than it used to be the precedent so far. But Ambassador Meera Shankar, you've been in the US, you've served for a long time. And when you talk about the Indo-American community, it's interesting to see that when Kamala Harris is being spoken of in media, in headlines, she's being mentioned, referred to as the South Asian American, not just as the Tamil American or the Indo-American, but South Asian American. Is it really possible to sort of bracket the community votes, saying that no, they will vote a certain way, that they will be voting Democrats? Or do you think that the Indo-American community today is much splintered? The South Asian American community is difficult to predict. And why is that vote bank so important? Because numbers-wise, it's really not that large.
As you mentioned, it's not such a large vote bank. Asians altogether, this includes Chinese, Filipinos, Vietnamese, Indian Americans, are about 4.7% of the total electorate. Hispanics would be the largest minority at 13% and blacks at a little over 12%. So in terms of numbers, it's not so important. But, the swing states are going to be very important in this election, where every vote is going to count. And in some of the swing states, the Indian American community could be in sufficient concentration to swing the vote one way or the other. That is one reason that is being given. The second is that the community is a wealthy community and they want to be more active in politics. So they've been taking a more active interest as political donors in recent years. And everybody, both Republicans and Democrats are trying to raise as much money as they can for what promises to be a toughly contested election. And for all these reasons, I think the Indian American community is being wooed by both sides. You also see that in the economic life of America, Indian Americans now head some of their most iconic companies, whether it's Google, whether it is Microsoft, whether it is IBM. Earlier, it was also PepsiCo, now no longer, MasterCard. I mean, these are not just small and middle-sized companies. These are the real biggies of America, iconic. So when you see an Indian American as a CEO, it makes a difference. It makes an impact on you. And I would say that the ability of Indian Americans to rise to the level of their merit in America has also something to do with the improvement in India-US relations over a period of time. Because once that comfort level increased, it was easier to breach the glass ceiling. As long as in some way the relationship was seen as somewhat constrained by differences, strategic differences between the two countries, I think the ability of Indian Americans to rise to their level of competence in America was also constrained. Now, all this, I think, makes an impact when you're looking at which communities you are going to mobilize or seek to mobilize. You've seen it with the Jewish community in America, which exercises a clout disproportionate to their demographic power in America, because they control the finances, they control the media, they control entertainment. So they control a large number of very powerful influencers or actual, financial decision makers. The Indian American community is not quite there, but they have been emulating, in a sense, the Jewish community. Because many, don't forget, also migrated from Uganda. Many of the Indian Americans in the US migrated from Uganda after Idi Amin threw them out. And many of them decided that they were not going to make the mistake that they made in Uganda, where they remained distant from the local politics and indifferent to it, which enabled this kind of xenophobic mobilization. They decided that they were going to be engaged and involved in public life. And therefore, you've seen two governors of states, Nikki Haley and the earlier one, both Republican in the South. And now you've seen more congressmen, in the House of Representatives who are Indian American, and of course Kamala Harris as the Indian American senator. So they are playing a larger role in public life, and they also seek to increase their public profile.
And it's that recognition, in fact, when you see that also, the kind of wooing the community for votes, be it, of course, wishes pouring in on Ganesh Chaturthi or the other Indian festivals as well. But Sriram, does the community look sort of very splintered today when it comes to Kamala Harris? Because on the one hand, when you have the values of liberalism that is being talked about, we have also seen Kamala Harris's, in fact, the relationship, which in a way has been volatile with New Delhi over issues of Pakistan or Kashmir. What has really been the reaction? Because we are also talking about the Indo-American community that filled up the stadium when Narendra Modi was there for the Houston Howdy Modi event with Donald Trump just a few months back. So are you able to sort of put one word or one bracket to the community's reaction so far?
The quick answer is no, and also because the news has been so recent. But what I will say to you is that, the way older Indian Americans vote, perhaps Indian Americans who are born in India, is not exactly the same way the younger generation votes, like the 45 years old and younger generation votes. They tend to vote more like other young Americans tend to vote. And based on the numbers that we have, overwhelmingly Indian Americans traditionally vote Democrat. About 77% voted for Hillary Clinton, for example. There is also the theory, and so far I have anecdotal evidence, I don't have the numbers yet, I'm expecting something over the next month and a half, that some of the older Americans especially, they are attracted to this Modi-Trump bonhomie and camaraderie, then, they might be migrating towards Trump. And the Republican Party is actually the Trump campaign, has very recently released an ad showing clips of Trump and Modi walking in the stadium in Houston and clips of Trump talking in Ahmedabad. And they are trying to get as many Indian American voters as possible. And Ambassador Shankar made a very important point about these battleground states. There are enough that, Indian Americans are not, there are about 4 million Indian Americans and a little over 4 million. And but these battleground states is where the parties are trying to make a play for them there. In fact, they've held events. The Democratic Party held an event a few weeks ago. They want to capture, they're targeting 1 million out of the 1.3 million Indian American votes in about 7 states. And the difference between Clinton and Trump in 2016 was less than the number of Indian Americans who live in some of those states. So those votes become very important, and both parties are making a play. But overall, to get back to your question, the majority significantly still votes for the Democratic Party. That's Biden, that's Harris. Of course, you're going to see some people being pulled towards Trump because of the Modi-Trump relationship. But as you go to the younger and younger Indian Americans, they will vote on issues like jobs. How do you recover from the pandemic? The racial issues, assuming the Democrats, they'll vote on those issues, not so much on what is Harris going to do with regard to India. Maybe their parents and grandparents will vote along those lines.
So it's an interesting point you're making, Sriram, that there may be a political discomfort about, a statement she may have made on Kashmir that may not have gone down well in New Delhi. But for the Indo-American community, while her Indian heritage is being hailed, the issues at stake, you are saying, are specifically going to be the American issues that they actually vote for.
Exactly. If I'm a 35, 40-year-old Indian American, I'm looking at jobs, I'm looking at childcare, I'm looking at racial tensions, and and assuming that I'm a Democrat, 7 in 10 chance that I am, then the issues that move other younger Democrats are the issues that are going to move me. Whereas my parents may be more concerned about what is, in this hypothetical example, not about me personally, what is the Kamala Harris doing with regard to India, for instance. So that effect is attenuated as you get further and further away from India in terms of generations. That's my sense.
Right. Ambassador Shankar, to bring you to this question, because the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson last week was asked about it, and he obviously said along expected lines that India would not want to comment on the internal affairs of the American election process. But would you sense that there is a certain degree of concern or discomfort, and how does it work? If Joe Biden really wins, how much of Kamala Harris's, in fact, perspectives or how she views New Delhi on some of the contentious issues is going to be a part of the White House policy on India?
Well, let me say, there are pros and cons, on both sides. Overall, there's a bipartisan consensus to build the relationship with India. And this is driven by the growing strategic convergence about how to manage the challenge of China and its increasingly assertive, if not actually bullying behavior in Asia. So that is the cement which brings the two countries together, and that straddles both parties. It is not unique to either the Republicans or the Democrats. And administrations over the years from both sides have helped to build the relationship, whether it was President George Bush or it was President Obama or whether it was President Trump. But now within this overall strategic framework, which is the primary driver of the relationship, you have differences in nuance, and that flows from the differences in what each party stresses. For instance, for the Democrats, human rights and democratic values have always been an important lodestar, if you will, and they have tended to give more prominence to those issues. But it is never to the exclusion of the core interests in the relationship. So I think these are things we can navigate, and we have learned to navigate over the years. In fact, when I was there as an ambassador, and there were disturbances in Kashmir with this, massive stone throwing demonstrations, we were able to ensure that the Democratic administration of Barack Obama made not a single statement on Kashmir. There are also things you do when you are in opposition, which you will perhaps resist from or abstain from when you are actually in power and responsible for taking a relationship forward. We were able to explain our point of view, and it was accepted by the Obama administration. Now, if you take a look at what Trump has done, he has, not bothered very much about human rights anywhere in the world or democratic values. He's in fact embraced dictators very heartily, whether they be in North Korea or elsewhere. And at the same time, he's been extremely protectionist. So some of the economic decisions that he's taken have hit India much harder than a mere statement on Kashmir. And I'm always surprised when Indians don't seem to prioritize bread and butter issues. The withdrawal of GSP for your exports, which means that your exports become less competitive vis-a-vis other countries, developing countries who might have that privilege. The second is the withdrawal of developing country status for India, which means that much tougher rules and regulations apply to your policies on trade and investment than previously. The concessions that you had as a developing country are no longer available. The increase in tariffs for your steel and aluminum exports, there's a whole lot. The restrictions on the H-1B visas, which made it very difficult for our software and IT companies to move engineers from India to the US, hitting at their core competitiveness. I mean, these are, and now he suspended the visas altogether till December. So these are things which have hit you core in the stomach, actually, taking away employment and jobs in India. And yet, India is very happy so long as he makes the right statements on test. So I think we also have to be able to sift the grain for the chaff in many of these issues and look at where, you know, the broad relationship is going and the fact that we will be able to navigate, whether it is a Trump administration or a Biden administration, we will be able to navigate and build on what has been achieved in the relationship so far.
Very important points that you have made there, and goes without saying that, of course, India today is also very different in the sense of its confidence, in the sense of its growth, and it's not really the pre-90s, in fact, India that we are talking about. So it enjoys bipartisan support. I'll let you have a final word, Sriram, you know, on this issue. Do you think that there will be a sense of conflict, you know, with when Joe Biden, Kamala Harris talk about the liberal values, and today we have to accept that we have a popular prime minister, but leading a kind of a majoritarian vision of a government, you know. So there are these controversial issues of CAA, of NRC. Where do these things really stand as far as Kamala Harris go?
Well, I mean, I think Ambassador Shankar hit the nail on the head. We're going to have pros and cons with any government in the US, any administration, and we'll see that with the next administration as well. Kamala Harris, for example, I think Minister Jaishankar backed out of meeting last December because Representative Jayapal, Pramila Jayapal, an Indian American, Indian citizen till her mid-30s, was not, they didn't want her to be part of it, and Kamala Harris said that she does not support a foreign government telling the US Congress which members of Congress can be part of it. Democrats have traditionally talked about human rights. They're going to do what they're going to do. They are going to talk about it. But on the other hand, you're going to see probably an easier relationship on trade. You're probably going to see, you will see a much easier relationship on immigration. Both Kamala Harris personally, she was one of the sponsors of bill in 2019 to actually increase the green card caps, the per country caps, and that would have really helped China and India, India first, because that's the most backlogged country. So Biden also supports an increase in both temporary and permanent work visas. So you're going to see a better relationship in those respects. So it's going to be a mixed bag. And while I haven't had an experience in bureaucracy, I'm sure, as Ambassador Shankar says, it's up to, you know, it's nothing that can't be navigated, and I'm sure they will figure out how to navigate this. But you can, one other point I want to bring up is it's not just the presidency that's at stake. There's the House and the Senate as well, and the House is likely to go to the Democrats again, and there are a few states in the Senate, if the Democrats win and they win the Senate as well, even if Trump comes back to the White House, Democrats will have control of both houses. So, you know, that's something to consider, because a lot of the human rights questions have raised around India's actions last year have come from Congress, not the administration.
Right. So of
So you
course,
have to look at all three. Sorry.
there are these larger unknowns, and it is a broad, wide relationship, and we can't crystal gaze at the moment as to what really happens in those final elections in November. Of course, in 2016, there was that large silent voters, as it was termed, who came out and voted for Trump, surprising the world in his victory. It was called the Black Swan event by many experts, but
Yeah.
this is one election that we are going to track very closely. Appreciate you joining us, Ambassador Meera Shankar and Sriram Lakshman, for this conversation here on ETV Bharat. And to